both on the call, a resource for the business community to get together, agnostic to anything, not religious, even though we are operating through the JCC, it's through the JCC, through the Jewish culture, but we are all inclusive. And basically, we try to get everybody together. So what we're doing is next week on Wednesday at the same time, we'll be doing another Zoom, and it's speed networking, so you can meet as many people in a short period of time as possible. And that is a great way to meet a lot of our peers here. Today, we are going to spend more time listening to Mark and John speak because obviously they have a lot of knowledge and insight as to what is happening in our crazy world right now. And do we know who is speaking first?
I'm going to speak first.
Okay. So John is, your reputation precedes you, John. John is an all-around great guy. But what the chamber is doing right now, so he's the president of the chamber, Boulder Chamber, and what they are doing for our business community right now is really helping us to, not completely collapse here in Boulder. And so I guess I'm going to just give you the floor and I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah, not completely. We're actually hoping for no collapse at all. So that's the ultimate goal. So, but thanks, Adam, for introducing me. And I'm going to share my screen and just to get the ball rolling and make sure that can everybody see that screen? I was thinking with Zoom that the new language is, you're on mute. Can you hear me? And can you see my screen, or like the three sort of social interaction terms? But what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, I just wanted the opportunity just to walk through some just baselining and where we are as a community economically, and give you a sense of just what the picture we're starting to see numerically. And then we'll talk a little bit about just what we're hearing anecdotally and picking up from business leaders directly. The second thing is just to hit on what is the process that we've begun to start the economic recovery in response to the impact of COVID-19. So it's two parts, and I'm going to go through it relatively quickly because I want to have plenty of time for Mark to address us. That the city is, and I will start by saying that the partnership that we have between the business community, the chamber, the city, in this situation is remarkable, and something that is, I demonstrates that, at times there can be differences over policy issues, but when our community has a struggle, a real challenge in front of it, we all come together. We recognize that we need to work together, as we say, pull our oars together and head in the same direction. So I'm excited to also have plenty of time for Mark and then questions. So with that in mind, I'm just going to note that we are doing our work through around the COVID-19 situation under our Boulder Together umbrella. And Boulder Together is a program of the Boulder Chamber that brings business leadership to bear to address the greatest challenges in our community. So many times there is a need for business leaders to step up and support our community in addressing whatever issues in front of us. Before COVID, it was workforce issues. I was talking to audiences about the challenges of an overheated economy and how difficult had become for businesses to attract the workforce that they need to fill their jobs. And it's because of things like high price of housing, transportation, commuting challenges, that sort of thing. So that was what we were focused on for about a year and a half up until March. But clearly the environment has changed, and now our Boulder Together efforts have brought business leadership to bear on this crisis that we're facing with COVID. So what is sort of the background summary? First of all, the basic overview is that, we used to be able to say, well, we're seeing slowing growth in domestic cases. And that was up until just a few weeks ago. And there's no question that this has turned around. And as we've eased the restrictions on business activity and personal freedoms, that has led to just significant growth, as we were talking earlier, just before people were coming on, Mark and I and the group, that we've seen the virus uptick, and that is a grave concern, because the only appropriate response is to have to pull back and have more restrictions. That's a really big concern for us. But we started with a strong footing pre-COVID. So we started with nationally with a good baseline, and that carried through. Colorado was particularly strong. We just were looking as the top of our performance economically. So that's a good baseline to start. It wasn't, folks had kept saying, boy, I'll bet you a recession is coming because we're due. Well, in reality, you're never due for a recession. You only get into a recession when there's some sort of trip up in the economy, like the housing crisis that we had for the last recession. We're chugging along great, and then boom, COVID. So now we're in a recession, headed to something potentially worse. We have, fortunately, initially, there was a great federal response, which mitigated some of the impacts that we suffered, getting people funding, dollars in their pockets so that they could spend that money and generate economic activity. So that was a great resource for us. What we can say is that the Colorado economy itself is somewhat overexposed relative to in the downturn, so in some areas. So when you think about tourism for the state, that is a significant part of our economy in big swaths of the mountain areas and other pockets of Colorado. So that has been been hit most devastatingly, and that's been a major impact to the state. Also, oil and gas has been hit very hard as a consequence of a couple things. One is some of the challenges and debates in the oil and gas industry over production, but it also then was compounded by just the lack of use of automobiles and that sort of thing, which drove down prices. So big areas of Colorado suffering significantly. But I will say that we're well positioned, and this relates to the Boulder, and we'll talk a little bit more about that we have a relatively diverse economy. We're not, a single economic engine focused economy. We're not just oil and gas or something like that. We have biotech, software development, natural products. All of these industries across the state set us up well for a broader based stabilization of our economy, and hopefully for a stronger recovery going forward. And then, just to be clear, there are select industries though that are getting hit significantly, and I touched on a couple of them, but there are others that just you wouldn't necessarily associate with tourism and oil and gas. There are things like personal services that are feeling the crunch because they just cannot have the same caseloads and working conditions that they had in the past. So just certain select industries just feeling damaged by this incident. And so that then is having potential collateral damage for a lot of other industries, because when you start to see that small businesses are suffering, other industries start to suffer. So for example, immediately our media started to feel the pain. The newspapers, et cetera, just saw a tremendous drop in advertising, which then led them to layoffs. And When you think about bigger companies like a Google, well, you know what, they seem impregnable and they're super stable. Well, they are holding on, but they certainly depend on a significant amount of ad revenue to keep them strong. And the hurt that small businesses and other business categories are feeling impacts them as well. So what does it look like in terms of just graphically? We talked about COVID cases and where are we seeing the incidents. You can see where across the nation the rise in COVID incidents of COVID infection, and many of the states that blew off some of the restrictions are feeling the most pain. But you also notice that some of them that initially were doing well, now all of a sudden are seeing a significant impact or uptick. And that's just very concerning for a lot of us. And also, during the summer, you think about the travel that folks do state to state, and that is a concern in particular for a place like Colorado that depends on tourism and rubber tire tourism. Folks coming to our state from some of these other high infection rate communities. You imagine some of those folks are carrying the virus into our state. So we are impacted. We can't just build a fence around Boulder. So the circumstances as they played out in the GDP, gross domestic product. I mean, it was a devastating drop, and then, as intuitive, I'm sure for all of you, as things started to open up, as we started to reopen our economy, things picked up significantly, and GDP has taken a great uptick. But there's a sense, and that the lines to the far right are predictions that we are probably going to see an uptick in the infection. Initially, it was just predicted for the winter. Well, you know what? Looks like we're going to be facing something quicker than that. And as we see the summer months, it's starting to uptick. And so the expectation is that we're going to have a seesaw in GDP going forward into the fall. The unemployment rate is, just to give you a sense of where things are. I mean, you can see the cliffs that occurred in March. And the good thing is that you see that Boulder County, relative to not just across the country, but relative even to Denver, other areas, we're doing relatively well. And so it bodes well and speaks to the strength and resiliency of our economy. And then you see also relative to other peer cities that we seem to be holding on to a relative stability. We didn't have April numbers yet for a number of our peer cities. And then just looking at total employment. I mean, I'm just going to quickly walk through these, but you see again that just the constant theme is just this cliff that we went off of when COVID came in. But you see the numbers and they're dramatic, but it's not like it went to zero. I mean, we still have significant employment happening and folks employed in our community. And comparing us across the state, you see that we have a relatively lower unemployment rate. And part of that is explained by the issue that is sometimes seen as a concern for our community, and that is that 2/3 of our workforce commutes into, in particular, the city of Boulder on a daily basis. So, and where jobs unemployment is recorded is actually in the county where that unemployment claim is filed. So if you imagine that if 2/3 are coming into Boulder, many of those folks live beyond Boulder County even. And so we would expect that those numbers would be higher if they were all attributed to the city of Boulder. And then you look at also where the greatest hit is. And I talked earlier about where some areas where we're overexposed relative to the rest of the country, relative to other peer cities. And we do have a great deal of tourism in Boulder. It's a significant part of our economy. And that's been hit significantly. And you see that at the lower, the bottom tier here, where it's leisure, hospitality, restaurants, et cetera. Those are the industries that are feeling it most significantly. And the stories that you hear from the individual operators confirm the numbers. I mean, they, many of them, all of them had to close for a period of time. Many of them were slow to reopen because they were concerned about bringing people in off of unemployment and then having to close again and then sending them back on unemployment. So it's been a slow, gradual return to business. But when you talk to them, yeah, they're able to sit outside and have seating in that area, but they're still treading water. They'll tell you that they're working literally just to keep their employees employed. There's no profit here. And they're very concerned about going into the winter months when there's just not an outdoor seating option. So that area of our economy is hurting. One thing to say about it, though, is that is a lower, those tend to be lower income jobs. So when you think about overall economic impact, and I'm putting aside for the time being the impact on individuals, that it speaks to the more resilient economy, because you see that the upper tier professional jobs tend to have had so far less impact. So for our economy overall, it's probably helpful to know that the greatest impact has been at these lower tier positions, but that the human toll is not to be ignored. It's something that we're very concerned about. You see where the new job postings are. It's very interesting to talk to the different business industries and hear what's happening. Again, I mentioned what's happening with the restaurants, but flip it over and you talk to an industry like Ball Aerospace or Market, which is it's a stock data system. They're hiring like crazy, and they can hardly find the staff to fill the positions. I think Ball was saying something like 50 people a month or something like that. I mean, it's very significant numbers of staffing that they're bringing on board. They have a lot of business. So the challenge becomes, and part of our economic recovery planning needs to be thinking about how do we align the folks who are now looking for work with the jobs that are available in the industries in our community. Another interesting statistic that just is, I think, important for us to pay attention to as we're starting to think about recovery, and that is where our population age is. And you see the significant student population. You also see the higher end age categories. And that's important for two reasons. One, it speaks to the importance of CU, and I'll hit on that in a little bit, but that population drives a significant amount of our economy, and it's here when the school is in session. So that's a factor that we have to keep in mind. And then second, when you see that Boulder has a relatively higher aging population, which I often say beats the alternative, right? But it's still it's a concern when you think about those restaurants. That age category is at most risk under COVID, and that is the category of folks who are least likely to feel comfortable going back into restaurants, going back into our retail businesses. So that's a factor that leads us to think about, in recovery, how do we make those folks feel more comfortable about getting back into our economy and back into some of our businesses. Just a few more slides just on sort of the current situation, things that are factors that are important to us. Commercial real estate, we tend to be a center for commercial office space, which reflects our strength of our economy and the businesses here. But there's a great deal of risk in that category. So why is that? Well, first of all, folks are saying, listen, I can just work from home. This remote workforce has become a thing, and I have a statistic on that to share. We also know that folks are thinking about, I can do deliveries at, have stuff delivered, so I don't need to go and patronize the local real estate locations. And then also significant infrastructure projects are being delayed because of COVID. And that could be a major factor for the convenience of folks to access our community for commercial business and to use our space to consider moving their business to our location. So these are all factors that are significant concern for us in the commercial real estate area, which has been a strength of ours. Just to give you a sense of the remote workforce circumstance, they did an international study not too long ago, let's say a month and a half, 2 months ago, but just when folks were getting used to starting the remote work environment. And you can see that 68% of folks are basically saying, hey, I can work from home. And that is a significant number of folks that are not just now employees who say, God, I don't have to go in the office anymore. It's employers saying the same thing. They're all saying that across the board, work from home is working out just fine. People are meeting their goals, doing the work they need to do. And so that tells us that could be a significant transition. Also, as I said, a threat to our commercial real estate area. But that said, something like 84% or 83%, whatever the precise number is, are saying that they still want an office environment. So, that's the flip side of the ability. You just don't want to draw too many conclusions, but that's really where, you start to say, well, we still need the office. The days of an office are not gone. People probably then will need more space because they can't be on top of each other. So that's the flip side of the risk to commercial real estate. But then you start to see the numbers, and it's interesting. Commercial office vacancies are going up, and you can see that just the statistics right there. You also see, interestingly, warehouse is vacancy. There's much less of that. And so as we start to move to, first of all, there's a great deal still of industrial activity, but there's need warehouse space for distribution and that kind of thing. So, will there be a move in that direction? But I think, and also you see retail vacancies, they are going up. So it's all an indication that we're starting to see some sort of movement and threat to our economic strength, which is, again, the business community that we've enjoyed having. You can see, again, also some of the commercial vacancies that are transition over time. And then finally, just the evidence of it is this additional evidence of it is the significant drop that we're seeing in new build construction. Residential still continues to be strong, but you can see that there is a great drop in the non-residential area. And that doesn't bode well for the indication of investment in our commercial area, commercial space. So what is the impact of all of this? When you just look at the retail, the sales tax numbers, restaurants, et cetera, when we talk about the impact they're having, well, restaurants contribute 13% to our economy, to our sales tax numbers in the past. That's now significantly down. I'm sure Mark will address some of this. And retail sales tax overall is down about 11% for over a 12-month period. So that's significant dollars as a result of some of the economic impact we've had. And finally, the CU factor. You just see how much of an economic generator CU Boulder is for our economy. Roughly $4 billion of economic impact. The students themselves spending also a significant $797 million in our community, and then also the campus related spending. That's how important it is that we keep CU. Hopefully CU can return back. Obviously we want to do everything safely, but this is demonstrates the importance of them to our economy. So just end sort of the picture with folks have been talking about like what kind of recovery are we going to have here? And initially it was like, okay, we're going to have this experience with COVID and it's going to be, a drop, but then a quick uptick because we're just going to figure things out, open up, and the virus will pass. Well, clearly that is not happening. And then the question is, well, what kind of recovery are we going to face? And overall, I'd say, we talk to some of the economists, they're talking about what they say the W, because they anticipate that there will be some setback, which is now happening sooner. But I will say that a number of folks are now moving more to this check mark or Nike swoosh symbol level of recovery, because the sense is that the damage has been much more significant than folks anticipated that it would be. And that means that it's going to be slow, arduous recovery as we get through this. But just now quickly, I want to just talk about like our what we're doing to address this. And so as we said, our economy was chugging along, going down the road super smoothly. It was just really, the things we were dealing with were more the consequences of a strong economy. And then boom, a boulder fell right in the road for Boulder, and it just plugged up our economy significantly. And that's a big boulder, and it's going to take a lot of work to chip away at it and to get clear the road for our economy going forward. So we feel we need now to start our economic recovery planning efforts. And here are just a few of the principles that we're going to be abiding by as we take that step. So first of all, we just essentially, we need to start now. History is being made. We're in the midst of this crisis. It's not like a hurricane came through town, knocked down all the buildings, and we know we need to pick it up. This is an ongoing, perpetual concern for us until such time as we find a vaccine or are able to suppress the virus to a point where it's not a threat. That's going to take time. We don't have that time. So we need to start acting now so that we understand the economy and we can start moving our recovery efforts to where we think the economy is going for the future and build support for our businesses in that direction. So skate to where the puck, not where the puck is, but where we think it's going based on all the evidence that we get to our economic recovery planning efforts. I also note that another principle is that this is going to be choppy. We're going to have setbacks. So we're going to need to make sure that our whatever plan we have is adaptive and can respond to the fits and starts of the positive and then setbacks for different industry sectors. So adaptive is going to be a critical, and flexible is going to be critical principles. We also can't be, just say, like I was saying about office space, we can't just assume things. We have to challenge our assumptions. So I refer to a friend of mine's line here that ready, aim, fire. We've got to make sure that we know where we're headed. So we're going to have limited resources. We're going to have limited opportunities. We're going to need to make sure we're on target before we pull the trigger and start to set up programs and activities that are going to support our economic recovery. And then finally, I say, we can do better, but we must do better. And by that, I mean, we are at a pivotal moment, not just for our economy, but for society. And COVID has exposed for all of us many of the challenging inequities that we face along racial lines or on economic lines. We recognize that we're not as resilient as we once thought we were. We weren't prepared for this pandemic. We need to make sure, we must make sure that we don't allow that to happen again, and that we address some of these systemic issues that have been challenges in the past. So the last thing I'm going to say is just so how we're doing this. First thing we're doing is we're going to be mitigating immediate needs, and we're already doing that. But that means when a business has an issue, and they're trying to understand the regulations under which they can operate, or they need some advocacy on behalf of their industry to sell drinks, out the front door, whatever it is. We're going to be spending a lot of resources making sure that we're hand-holding and supporting our businesses right now amidst the crisis. But then we're going to start the recovery effort. And the first part of that is the partnerships that I mentioned with the city of Boulder, with all of our economic development authorities, making sure that we all have in place the resources that we need to start planning for the recovery. And then it becomes intuitive. The first thing is the quantitative analysis, setting up the data that tells us what is the condition, not just broadly, but in specific industry areas. How are they doing? What's their temperature? What is the level of investment in our startup businesses? What is happening to personal income as a result of this threat of the COVID experience? Because that'll tell us a lot about where the strength of our economy and where we're going. But then we're going to back it up with structured qualitative analysis, meeting with the business leaders from all of our major industry sectors, both the primary industries, but also the supportive service industries, finding out from them directly what's happening to them on the ground in their business. Is it a business that's doing well but still needs our support? And we, let's say aerospace, and we need to lobby the federal government to continue NASA funding, whatever it is, in order to drive their business success. Heck yeah, we will do that. But there are many businesses that are suffering. There are many industry sectors. What is it that we hear from them that they need us to do to support them? And then we'll build the plan. And building the plan is a short term, getting from, out of the crisis back to stability, but then it's long term. And long term is those things that I mentioned about resiliency and equity. Just a small one that just comes to mind to me is that we have a community, as a community, we've talked about investing in broadband infrastructure. And yet, we put it off, kicked the can down the road, and slow rolled this thing. And now we're sitting here in an environment where we look at a community to the north, Longmont, and they have high-speed internet across the community, and we're sitting here with many areas of our community underserved. We can't allow that to happen. We need to make those kinds of investments in our long-term future. So last thing, I often ask, how can you help? It's personal responsibility is the first thing, and that is, hey, listen, let's all wear our masks, but also, support our businesses as they try to operate safely and appropriately to keep going strong. So that's my presentation. I tried to go fast, probably didn't, but I just getting through all of that. So hopefully that was good, just background from A, what is the situation, and B, what are we doing right now to drive our economic recovery efforts. And I hand it off to Mark.
That's a tough act to follow.
Yes. So actually, we have a bunch of questions. So let's address those now, if you don't mind, and then we'll get to Mark right after.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is from Beth. How many businesses are you predicting will close in Boulder before the end of the year? Close permanently.
Well, that's Beth. That's a really hard question to answer. But I'll just say this: that we have about 7,000 businesses in Boulder, and when you think about just the number of restaurants in that category, maybe it's in the hundreds or something like that. I mean, I don't know how many of those are going to make it. I'm hopeful that we'll support significant numbers of them, but I don't even know now. No one knows how many of them have closed so far. So looking into a crystal ball at this point, I apologize, but I can't make that prediction. I could be hopeful that few of them will close, but I've already seen evidence that some of them have. But long story short, I don't have a good sense of that, Beth.
Thank you. So from Steve, we've seen Boulder County hotels that have gone under. What percentage of the Boulder economy is tied to CU/administration population spending? I guess this is not necessarily, because you did present about the population, but this is about how much of the economy is coming from it.
Yeah, well, you saw the economic impact. I mean, $4 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money. I mean, spread that around the state for sure. But when you then think about the student spending, if those students don't come back, the Hill will suffer tremendously, just as a small, element of our economic picture. Just a small example right there. So I can speak in terms of the numbers. I can also speak in terms of specific categories of business activity that would be most directly impacted. And the picture is, I would say, significant, and it would be, a grave concern if we do not see the return of the students. I mean, just a single football game, I can't remember the number. Somehow it's $5 million sticks in my head of the economic impact of a football game, but it's enormous. Hotels, dining out, retail sales, all of that on just one football weekend. And if you don't have it, which they've already canceled the first part of the season, that's already impacting many of our businesses.
Wow. Thank you. And then, so Bobby, on a retail level, do you see landlords lowering their rents to make space for more affordable small businesses? Obviously, there's lots of rent signs, and you showed us the vacancy statistics.
Yeah. So I will say that it's all individual to the landlord and the tenant. So, initially there were calls for landlords to stop charging rent or to obviously not to evict tenants, et cetera. So I will tell you this, when you talk to the landlords, they have absolutely no interest in losing a tenant. It's not like there's a retail space and the restaurant in there that's been doing great for 20 years, and now all of a sudden they can't pay their rent because of COVID, that somehow the landlord's thinking, yeah, I got to get this person out of here so I can get somebody in. There's nobody coming in. So they want to work out the relationship with their tenant, but then they have to pay their own bills. I mean, some of these, you think about some of the everybody thinks about the big commercial property owners, but there's a lot of small commercial property owners that own maybe one building in town, and that's their retirement income, and maybe they still have to pay off the mortgage. These folks are very concerned about their tenant mix and making sure that they can get the rent. So there's all sorts of individual discussions, and you can't make a blanket decision. Apple Computer doesn't need to have rent abatement. They're doing just fine. Some restaurants and retailers, yeah, they're hurting significantly, and the landlords want to work with them. So as a general rule, I'd say that there's a lot of that kind of negotiation going on to keep tenants in place and also allow the landlords and landowners to meet their financial obligations.
Thank you. There are three more questions, but they're kind of between you and Mark, and I'd like to see a little ping pong action when we get to it. So I'm going to move to Mark. Mark is one of our city council members here in Boulder. He has experience in the public and private sector throughout his life, including development. So he really understands all sides of the issues that are going on here. So Mark, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. I am not going to have slides today. I'm simply going to talk a little bit about where things are in the city, how we're dealing with the crisis, and perhaps where we can go from here, hopefully. I want to start with a little snapshot of how we are doing in terms of COVID. While Colorado is moving a little bit in the wrong direction right now, the county is staying relatively firm. We've had about 1,825 cases. 74 people have passed away, and 2/3 of those have been in long-term care facilities. The graph of new cases has been staying relatively, and obviously, I'm sad to report that today we've hit another national milestone in that now more than 150,000 people have died as a result of the pandemic. And I will leave you to draw your own conclusions as to how we got to this dismal place. John is correct that in a time of crisis like this, there is a great deal of cooperation that goes on between the city, private sector, agencies. John did not give himself credit for one thing. In the early stages of the pandemic, when people were very, very fearful of evictions on the commercial sector, John spearheaded an effort to contact many of our largest commercial landlords who committed to working constructively with their tenants to try to navigate the crisis. Now, it's true, as John said, that no landlord in this climate wants to lose a tenant. The economics are terrible if you do that. But still, I thought it was a very strong response to this crisis. At the same time, the city's affordable housing agency, Boulder Housing Partners, has committed to a no eviction policy for the foreseeable future. And as they handle 1,400 affordable housing units, and they're the largest single residential landlord in the city, that doesn't cure us of any possibility of evictions, but it goes a long way towards ameliorating the problem. We don't have good data at the moment in terms of evictions. I know many communities are anticipating what has been called a tsunami of evictions as a result of COVID. We don't have good data yet as to what it's going to look like here. So far, I think things are holding fairly steady. And it may be some of the same kind of analysis. If you lose a residential tenant, where are you going to get the next one? I expect that to change a little bit. I expect there to be an increase in those evictions, but hopefully it will not be the tsunami that some people have anticipated or desired. But we will see. Small business obviously is the most vulnerable portion of our economy. 96% of our businesses have less than 50 employees. And so that is where a lot of the concern goes. You will note that the city was very proactive in the restaurant sector, closing off a couple of streets near the Pearl Street Mall, providing programs by which restaurants could move out onto the sidewalk, do business out there, and try to give them a lifeline. And the city staff was unbelievable in this effort. I think 89 applications were filed. They were turning them around in a couple of days. They just cut through all of the bureaucracy, and they got restaurants out there on the streets serving food and beverage. And I think that's important. Moving back out to a slightly larger viewpoint, where the city is right now, we are currently estimating a drop in sales tax for this year of between $30 and $35 million. Many of you probably are aware that we've had to either furlough or let go almost 13% of the workforce. It's a very painful thing. Obviously, for anyone who is subject to that, it's painful for the city, it's painful for the morale of remaining staff, and it is painful for the populace of the city in terms of our ability to provide services. But that is where we are. Some of the shortfall is going to be made up this year in terms of postponement of capital projects, not hiring for vacant positions and that sort of thing. Obviously, if it continues into next year at that level, we're going to be facing some very, very difficult choices. And I can't sugarcoat that for you. It's going to be difficult if we remain at that kind of level of shortfall. We're a highly taxed city. It's not that you can make up that money with new taxes, especially in a community where people are suffering and experiencing loss of income or no income. So that is where the city is at the moment. We have been aggressive in terms of trying to provide resources to businesses and to residents and putting them in touch with agencies that can be of assistance, mediation in terms of residential tenants, letting people know where there's emergency rental assistance. There's a program from the state that can be applied for. And this is all in addition to the CARES Act. There's a new program coming online in August called the Colorado Gap Fund. And we're trying to match the people in need with the resources that are available. Some of what we do is informational, letting people know where things are and how to apply, how to navigate the process. And occasionally, as with our challenge grants, we've actually made direct investments in small businesses. But I am very concerned about the nature of the recovery, the time that it will take. I'm very concerned about the longer term impact that this is going to have on the hospitality industry in particular. And again, people who are employed in that industry tend to be in lower income segments. And so there's an unfairness and inequitable quality to the impacts that are being experienced by our community in terms of COVID. And of course, people of color are experiencing COVID at a higher rate of infection than the rest of the population. So all of those things are of great concern to us at this point. And John is right. There's a certain adaptability that we're going to have. We're making this up as we go along. Nobody on council, for instance, had any experience with a situation like this. I'm not sure that I would agree with John's characterization that it was a lack of resilience, because I don't know how foreseeable this was. Certainly not for the community of Boulder, and I'm not sure what we would have done in advance. It's an unprecedented situation. For those of us on council, it's unprecedented in terms of the difficulties of trying to navigate through to a stronger and better future. But as John said, if we do this collaboratively and cooperatively, I think we have enough innate strength in our economy to weather the storm. We won't weather the storm equally in terms of various segments of the market, but as a whole, I think we can get to the other side of the river. But a lot of it is going to depend upon is there ultimately a vaccine that we can rely upon, or B, what does the new normal ultimately look like? And if it looks like what we have today, your hospitality industries are going to remain prostrate. I don't think there's any other word to use for it. John is also correct in terms of the impact of CU. On Thursday, the leadership of CU is meeting via Zoom, of course, with council members to describe how they view the coming semester and what their plans are. And I expect them to be suitably cautious and careful. But for those of you who follow baseball, know that whatever plans you make can go awry. The Florida Marlin team is now fully infected with COVID, 18 out of 25 people. We have to be responsive to events in terms of educating young people at CU, as we're going to have to be responsive to events in terms of how we open up our schools. Those are two critical elements of our society, and anybody who tells you they know how it's going to work out is frankly blowing smoke. The best we can do is analyze it, follow the science, make the best judgments that we can, and then adapt as we see the facts on the ground. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, and I'm sure John is as well.
Thank you, Mark. So there are three questions, and everybody, please, if you do have questions, put them in the chat box, and I will be happy to ask them for you. So this one's from Mark Wood, and I'll let you guys kind of decide who's going to answer each one. But in light of the 40 to 50,000 students that are going to be arriving in Boulder in the next 2 weeks, many out of state, what additional precautions are going to be taken to protect the locals from COVID?
Well, I don't know in great detail CU's plans yet. That's the part of the purpose of the Thursday meeting. But I'm sure they will, they have done some things. And one of the sources of infection have been social gatherings on the Hill, and we're all aware of those. And I'm sure everybody saw the photos of hundreds of people down at Ebongi Fine Park a couple months ago. CU has been working with the city on a stronger enforcement regime, and doing so with landlords as well, putting landlords on notice that they're going to be held responsible if there are repeated violations on their property. There's going to be a more robust enforcement mechanism for students who continually violate protocols, and they could actually be at risk of disciplinary action by the university. And I suspect that in the end will be much more meaningful than pure police enforcement. And hopefully that will control one of the sources of spreading infection. But let's also be honest, we're dealing with 18 to 21-year-olds. And if I recall my own experience as an 18 to 21-year-old, I did not have a brain. And there are going to be incidences of inappropriate behavior because that's the nature of the beast. That's how college kids behave. We're trying to find a balance between enforcement and education. Education to date hasn't been working that well, but we're trying to find that appropriate balance in light of the fact that we're not going to throw 100 kids in jail. It's just not the way we do it, and it's not feasible. So that's a long-winded way of saying that there's a lot to be learned yet, but I believe CU is going to be taking a fairly cautious approach to how they do this.
You know, I'll just add in, Mark's summary was great, and two things. One, that on the enforcement and then education side, the business community is going to be actively engaged in the education component. And one of the things that we're talking about is how do we come up with uniform messages from CU, from the business community, from the city that are compelling for the youth. And so we're talking about everything from using their own the students to reach out and communicate those messages down to their favorite restaurant establishments, and having those be the conveyors of the messages about social distancing and wearing a mask, etc. Second, I'll say that CU has incredibly creative and innovative programs in place to try to limit the exposure of students in large groups. They're breaking the students up into small cohorts. They're in the dorm rooms, they're a little bit more spreading of the students. They're going to be testing the wastewater for signs of the virus. They're looking at all sorts of testing regimes for students. Any student that comes to school must have had a test, I think within 10 days or something of coming to school, and that's going to be students and faculty. So there's a number of different mechanisms that they're using to try to contain the virus and try to make it a safe environment. But, you know, it's in the theme that Mark referenced too. It's, you know, we're going to have to adapt. We're going to see, you know, some ups and downs, and we're going to just have to respond to those as we see them. And we know the beast that we're dealing with. I mean, these are young kids who tend to be a little bit more reckless with their health, and that's a situation that we need to do everything we can, education, enforcement, to try to control.
You know, you see it a little bit on the Pearl Street Mall. The people who are not wearing the masks tend to be younger. If you're going to your favorite restaurant with a date, you don't want to be wearing a mask. It's just not what they want to do. We need to acknowledge that and try to find a way to educate them better, so that, you know, this is not the problem that it is today.
A lot of finger shaking. I know that's going to work.
Did it ever work for you?
Yeah, absolutely not.
No.
I did the opposite. So yeah, we'll use reverse psychology on them. That's what we'll do. Because go ahead, gather. Go ahead.
All right, thank you guys. So this is from Steve. I know hundreds of highly experienced professionals who recently lost jobs. What job connection resources are best to use for local Boulder County needs?
Get that first, yeah. So there are a great deal of resources. First of all, there is Workforce Boulder County, and Workforce Boulder County is a place where you connect with around unemployment claims, that sort of thing. But the woman Erin Jones, who runs our workforce center, is really experienced, and her team is excellent at then guiding folks who are experiencing unemployment to job opportunities, not just job opportunities that are available now, but then helping them to get training services, et cetera, that will prepare them for other jobs in the future. So it's a great resource, and I highly recommend it. There's also on our website, if you go to boulderchamber.com/COVID-19, so boulderchamber.com/COVID-19, there is a resource page, and in there's a number of different resources for your workforce. And there's statewide websites that are job matching services. So that's an excellent resource. There's now a resource that's online for the startup business community. They have job openings, and it's something that, you know, may be harder to identify because they're not large companies. So it's a great resource for posting jobs and then for folks to identify them. So there's a couple of resources, but definitely go online to boulderchamber.com/COVID-19. Interesting, just a little anecdote. You know, there's always speculation about, well, what industry sectors are going to feel the pain or not do well. And one of them that you think, maybe it's going to suffer during this time is the startup universe, and small businesses needing capital infusion, and people might be getting, you know, constraining their resources, holding on to them. But quite to the contrary, I mean, I've been in conversations, and we're going to also identify the data sources to confirm this, but I was talking to somebody who's a leader in the venture capital world, and he said the real problem is they don't have enough deal flow. They're looking for startup businesses to invest in because you don't want to put your money in the stock market right now. At least that's what some folks are saying. Bonds and traditionally safe investments are yielding nothing. And so what are folks who have some resources to invest doing? They're putting it in longer term plays, which are these startup businesses that provide the opportunity for some sort of a payout, maybe in 5 years time frame or something like that. So interesting to both, there's interesting job opportunities in that space, just to answer that question, but also counterintuitive maybe in terms of what areas of the economy that may be strengths for our community.
Thank you. So this is another one from Steve. Given the high cost of real estate in Boulder, what actions are being done to try and address affordable housing needs? And I know, Mark, you did touch on that a bit, so I don't know if you would like to elaborate.
There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that there are things being done. Boulder Housing Partners, for instance, is very aggressive in creating affordable housing units. There are some private affordable housing developers who are quite active in the community. In fact, last night at the council meeting, we looked at a project that was going to create 60 some odd affordable housing units and have it be done privately without subsidy. The bad news is it is almost impossible to make Boulder a fully affordable town. And I'm saying this both, not so much as a member of council, but as somebody who used to be a real estate developer. When the average single family home price in Boulder is somewhere around $850,000, it is very hard to do anything that will turn that into affordable housing. We have loosened the restraints on ADUs, and that may continue to increase over time. But there are only so many things that can be done. Realistically speaking, we are not going to raise Martin Acres and Devil's Thumb and put apartment buildings there. And if we did, most of those would not be affordable either. One of the problems that we have is that the main source of our affordable housing is through fees and inclusionary housing statutes that require 25% affordability when you do a development project. But that means 75% of it is market rate, and the market rate development continues. One of the things that I have long thought is that if we want a more robust affordable housing program, and this was before COVID, it was my view that government has to be more directly involved, either in terms of land banking or investing its own money to acquire land, because when you take the land cost out of something, out of a project, then you can get decent levels of affordability, both for lower income and middle income. We're not building any middle income housing in Boulder at all. And it's not enough just to build affordable housing. We need to build housing for people who are otherwise commuting in from Lafayette or Superior and have good jobs and would love to live here, but $800,000 for a starter house in Martin Acres is really not within the realm of possibility. So we can do more, or I had hoped we would do more before our resources became as strained as they are. Right now we're treading water, and that's simply the long and the short of it. Government has a role to play that it hasn't been playing in 40 years since the time of Ronald Reagan. I would like to see that change on a national level, on a state level, on a local level. But the market itself is not going to get you vast amounts of affordable housing. That's what a developer does, in short, is to build to the highest price point they can achieve in the area in which they are building. That's sort of the law 101 of development economics. And so most of the projects we see are not going to be affordable. We can get more density in certain areas of Boulder along 28th and 30th and Arapahoe. But again, if 75% of it is market rate and only 25% of it is affordable. It's better, but it's not really moving the needle. So Boulder is an expensive town. We can build more affordable housing, but we are not going to turn it into a totally affordable community. You know, for $300,000, you can probably buy the best house in North Platte. That won't get you a 1-bedroom in Boulder. And that's not going to change so dramatically over the next foreseeable period of time.
So I'll just weigh in and I'll say a couple things. So first of all, I always hesitate to have discussions with Mark on this because he actually has done this work before, so it's puts me at risk. But I will say this couple things. First of all, Mark is absolutely right on in terms of the price of Boulder housing. In fact, I think probably what Mark was referencing, because somebody asked about it, that 850 or 900, whatever it is the median. The average is something like 1.3 or 1.4 million.
1.2, you're right, John.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, we our Boulder Together program, as I mentioned, one of the focus areas was housing affordability, and we had a brochure that we produced, and we kept getting close to finalizing it, and then we had a statistic in there for the average housing price, and it just kept going up, and it was like, oh my God, it's now 1.4, and it was like, oh my God. So anyway, it's point is that if you just let the market, do sort of the standard single family development or whatever, you're going to have high price housing. Any a small 1,000 square foot unit, a condo unit, is going to be more expensive if it's just left to the market in Boulder than it would be anywhere else. The one area that I think, just speaking on behalf of the chamber, that we tend to think of when we're talking about the opportunities for additional, more affordable housing, is the kinds of programs that Mark mentioned, which is the 25% set asides, et cetera, for affordable housing units in any developments. But just in our mind, it's the mix of new housing and of all types of condos, townhomes, et cetera. It's not going to change. That Mark's right. It's not going to make Boulder all of a sudden, as cheap as it is in Kansas, some rural Kansas community or something. I don't know why I said that. So in some other community, but it's because it's going to be Boulder prices. You're living in Boulder, but the more smaller units you have, those are just, by their nature, they're lower price, lower rent rates, or lower cost of purchase. So we are supportive of more of that. And I know that infill and redevelopment are touchy issues. So we're always sensitive to that. In fact, Adam and I, our first meeting was around a neighborhood conversation around redevelopment along Arapahoe. Those debates are going to be, there's a great history of Boulder debates in that area, and we're just the next generation of it. But I see a lot of opportunity in some of our underutilized industrial areas for redevelopment of mixed use, and which includes housing, there may be even more opportunities, you don't know, coming out of the COVID situation. So, I have visions of a more broad-based diversity in our housing stock, and if some of it's going to be direct government-assisted housing and regulations, and other, the market will provide a lower cost housing unit, which, yeah, Mark is right, it's going to be higher priced than in most places, but at least size-wise, it'll have be a lower cost for people who are willing to make that kind of investment.
If we're going to have an honest conversation, and by the way, I always refer to the density wars as Boulder's favorite hobby.
Totally. Yeah.
If we're going to have an honest conversation about housing prices in Boulder, to some great degree, they're a function of the blue line, height limitations, and those kinds of restrictions. You're
open space.
We are in a city where you cannot build up and you have very limited opportunities to build out. Now, for me, the open space and the height limitations are very fundamental to what makes Boulder Boulder, and I would be devastated if those went away. There are people in town who don't feel that way. Last year, somebody did an op-ed in the Camera advocating taking a couple of square miles of open space for affordable housing. You could make the argument, that's just not an argument I would want to make for myself. I think Boulder is a unique city, and it is unique not because it is expensive, but it has certain policies that make it more expensive than it otherwise would be. If your values are such that you prefer a much larger population and lower cost housing, then you have to make the arguments that the height limitations, the blue line and open space need to be revised. Again, it's not an argument I would make, but that's the other side of the coin. You know, I tell people that if you could go up 20 stories in Boulder, I'd go back into the business and develop a 20-story apartment building, because the views would be incredible and the prices would be incredible. And I say that only jokingly, of course, but the way Boulder is a product of policies that were set 50 years ago. And there has to be at least some acknowledgement of those limiting factors in the future development of the city. If you take the square miles of open space and add it to the square miles of Boulder, you are within 1/10 of a mile of the area of Brooklyn, New York. So Brooklyn, New York has 2.5 million people. We have the space for 2.5 million people. But I don't think anybody here wants to live like that. I know I don't. So everything is a function of balance and what values you wish to support. I prefer to advocate for affordable housing where we can, in the knowledge that we will never be as affordable as Longmont. Not going to happen. And I'm
just for the record, this is not much of a debate, because I don't really think the chamber is proposing to build on open space either.
No, I know.
No. I would tell you, because this is recorded, Mark. I just want to make sure that I cleared the record.
People would come with pitchforks in front of the chamber.
I know. I want my building standing.
These are only opinions, right?
Exactly.
So, we have a little bit of time left. There are still some questions. Do you guys want to make any closing comments, or do you want to try to get through at least one more of the questions?
I'd rather do questions, because that's what people are interested in.
Okay. Yep. All right. So I realize tax revenues are way down. However, are there still monies in the budget to deal with the crumbling infrastructure, and in particular, some of the main roads that are in bad condition? Our infrastructure is critical to our economy.
It is, and there is, but it's going to be a little more limited for the next year or two. And I would not want to mislead you and say otherwise. It's just, that's just where we are at the moment. $35 million is a lot of money to have to cover.
Yeah, I'll just only add that Mark's got a tough job. It is not easy coming on city council and your first 3 months in to get hit by this crisis. The city council has a very difficult juggling job in front of it, and the answer is going to have to be economizing and efficiency. It's not just the city of Boulder that doesn't have sales tax money to put towards roads and other infrastructure. We rely on the state and the federal government, and so to the extent that they're having to pull back, it's going to be a challenge. So we've got to make sure that we invest in the basics. So what that looks like is going to be a policy debate that Mark's going to be right in the middle of. But we also just have to face reality. I mean, these are going to be tight times. And I think for me, what it points out is something that for many in our community have taken for granted, and that is a strong economy is incredibly important to the balance of what makes Boulder special. We have a beautiful environment. We have a wonderful social, cultural environment. We need a strong economy to keep that up, to lift all those elements of what makes Boulder great. So it brings that point to home for me. And that's why I'm going to be working really hard with Mark and the other City of Boulder folks to bring our economy back.
All of these choices are very, very difficult. And, if you close down a pool, that impacts somebody who's using it as their main source of recreation. It's not an immaterial consideration for that individual. So whether you're closing a rec center, curtailing hours at a pool, limiting the use of the reservoir, all of these things are difficult choices that are going to have to be struggled with over the next couple of years. It is a tough time to be on council. I tell people I'm living the dream, but it's more like living the nightmare.
Exactly.
So thank you guys, and thank you, Bobby, for the question. And then Beth is asking, are there any resources to connect people with startup investors right now?
There are, and I would say things like what is it called? Rocky Mountain, the venture, Rocky. You know what? Email Deborah, I'll get it to you. But Rocky Ventures, I forget what it's called, but that's a big center for investment in startup businesses. And then there's other organizations, angel investor funds, et cetera, that would be helpful. Yeah, Rocky's Venture Club. Thank you, Steve.
I'm thinking Yvette Bowden at Economic Vitality might have information on that.
Yeah. And we have other resources. We have other connections. So either email Mark and me, and we'll help get that information.
Okay.
All right, a few more questions. Can you comment at all on the recent negotiations and progress with Xcel Energy?
Sure. As of yesterday, a tentative deal had been reached between Xcel and the city. Bob Yates and Sam Weaver had been the negotiating team for the city along with staff. How you view that deal is really going to depend on how important the municipalization is to you. There are people who are going to absolutely want to continue the effort towards municipalization under any circumstances, and will not find the compromises that were reached acceptable. There are people who don't much care for the muni, and they may be saying, thank goodness, it's about time. I haven't gone into detail with it yet, since we only got the first term sheets yesterday. A number of the points that were agreed upon, I think, are very useful to the city. Over the first 10 years of the franchise agreement, which we would have to enter into in order to settle the case, we have, I believe, 5 points at which we can opt out. 2 of those points we can opt out at our sole discretion. And the other 3, we could opt out if Xcel failed to meet certain carbon reduction goals. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there. We put a cap on the condemnation award, which includes going concern value and resolves all issues relating to our substations. And I think that's important if we end up having to renew our efforts, let's say in 5 years. Some of the litigation would be simplified, I believe. My only disappointment was that we were not able to negotiate a cap on claims for stranded asset costs in the event that we have to renew the muni effort. I would have preferred that, but no agreement is perfect. This one certainly is not, but I think it has a number of very interesting provisions in which XL has committed to do things like work with us at the state level to get a repeal of the law that prevents you from generating more than 120% of your electricity needs and contributing or selling off the balance to others. They're going to cooperate with us in terms of our distribution network, and we will have a lot of input as to how that's done. We haven't received any undergrounding funding for 10 years. They're going to put $33 million towards that, of which half will be spent in the next 5 years. So there are many features about it that I think are very, very attractive and useful. The decision on this obviously is well above my pay grade. It's going to be made by the community. We're going to have a public hearing on it. People will say their piece, and then presumably we will put it to the community for their approval, and everybody will be able to weigh in. My initial response is I think it's a promising agreement. I need to study it more. I'm certainly going to support putting it on the ballot, because it's not for me to decide that it's not a satisfactory agreement. How I ultimately vote on it, I need to study it a little bit more, but it's certainly a promising start.
And I'll just
All right,
comment.
thank you, Mark.
Do you want me to take time, or should we end it here, Adam? It's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, so we're at 5:30. If you have a quick comment, you can say it, and then we'll just wrap up right after that.
Okay, my only comment is that the Boulder Chamber has always thought that we had more opportunity to achieve our goals, our clean energy goals, in partnership with XL, and that we are then excited that this process has come to the conclusion that it has. We have to look at the details too, but just like Mark, we are, the initial take looks like this is a win for the economy, the community, and the environment. So we're thankful for the leadership of this council to get us to this point. And as Mark said, the voters will decide, but we'll give it our scrutiny, but at first blush, this is very promising.
And I actually come at it from a different perspective because I'm a supporter of the muni.
Yeah.
But conditions have changed somewhat. XL has become a little more flexible in its approach. And this is a difficult time to be dipping into the general fund for money to prosecute the legal case. And our tax monies are going to run out in a year or so. And we would either have to renew the tax or dip into the fund. And it's very hard for me to contemplate dipping into the general fund when we have so many other needs that are not going to be funded. And this would be a very long, to the death litigation. And I'm prepared to consider this because it's not getting me 100% of what I want, but 70 or 80% in my calculation is a win. And I think that's where I'm at here. This is 70 to 80% of what I could expect. So I'm
all right, Mark. Yeah, Mark, John, thank you guys both so much for being here. It's, I mean, this was extremely informative. Everybody is saying their thanks in the chat box as well. And I do want to remind everybody that the speed networking is next Wednesday, same time, same place. So thank you, everybody. So can I have everybody put their hand up like this? All right, now wave, bye.
Adam, next time we do a Nosh and network, I want the Nosh part.
I'm so with you.